It was one of those mornings that felt heavier than it should. The air outside the courthouse was thick with humidity, the kind that made your shirt cling to your skin. People moved quickly, coffee in hand, rushing to hearings, filing papers, pretending life inside that old building was still fair. At the bottom of the marble steps, a woman stood quietly, holding a sleek black briefcase close to her chest. Her name was Amara Lewis, calm, elegant, and composed. She wasn't dressed in anything fancy, just a beige blouse, dark pants, and low heels. But there was something in her eyes, the kind of quiet confidence that only comes from someone who knows exactly who she is. She climbed the steps slowly, lost in thought, when a sharp voice cut through the morning air. "Hey, you can't go in there!" A uniformed officer stepped in front of her, tall and broad, with a smirk that didn't match his badge. His name tag read Officer Blake. He looked her up and down, his gaze dripping with disdain. "This entrance is for authorized personnel only," he said, folding his arms. Amara blinked, confused. "I work here," she replied politely. He laughed, the kind of laugh that makes your stomach tighten. "Yeah, sure you do, and I'm the mayor." People passing by slowed down, pretending not to stare. Amara's fingers tightened around the handle of her briefcase. She didn't want trouble. She didn't want attention. But she could feel it coming. "Sir, if you just let me explain." "I said back off," he barked, stepping closer. "You people think you can just stroll in anywhere you want, huh? Not today." Her heart pounded, but her voice stayed calm. "I have a hearing scheduled at 9. Please check the docket." He smirked again. "Lady, I don't need to check anything. You're not supposed to be here." Amara looked past him, at the doors behind him, her doors. She'd walked through them 1,000 times before, but now, standing there, she realized this man didn't see her as someone who belonged. A small crowd began to gather. Some whispered. Some looked away. Nobody stepped forward. Blake's hand hovered near his holster. "Last warning. Leave before I make you." Amara took a slow breath. Her voice, soft but firm, carried a weight he couldn't comprehend. "Officer," she said, meeting his eyes, "you're making a mistake." He grinned. "No, ma'am. I think this time I'm finally doing my job." And with that, he reached for her arm, not realizing he was about to commit the biggest mistake of his career. The moment Officer Blake clamped around Amara's arm, the world seemed to freeze. A sharp gasp came from somewhere in the small crowd. His grip was rough, unnecessary, the kind that came from habit, not caution. Amara tried to pull back, but his fingers dug deeper into her skin, leaving white marks behind. "Let go of me," she said firmly. Her voice didn't shake. "Not yet." "Not a chance," Blake sneered. "You're coming with me." Before she could say another word, his open palm struck her across the face. The sound was deafening, a slap so loud it echoed against the courthouse walls. Papers fluttered from her briefcase, scattering like fallen leaves across the steps. The people watching gasped, but didn't move. Phones came out. Some started recording, others just stared, frozen between fear and disbelief. Amara stumbled, catching herself on the cold stone railing. Her cheek burned, her vision blurred, but she didn't cry. She just straightened her back, lifted her chin, and stared at him, that same quiet confidence still flickering behind her eyes. "Filthy liar," Blake hissed, grabbing her by the wrist and twisting her arm behind her back. The cold metal bit into her skin. People whispered louder now. Some even laughed nervously. Others shook their heads, muttering, "She must have done something." No one helped. Not one person. Amara looked up through the strands of her hair. Her eyes found the bronze plaque above the courthouse entrance. She read the words she knew by heart. "Justice for all." The irony stung worse than the slap. Blake shoved her forward. "You like playing lawyer, huh? Let's see how you do in front of a real judge." She stayed silent, holding her breath as he dragged her inside. The same courthouse where her name was engraved on the second floor, outside her chamber.
The first time that morning, a small, knowing smile touched the corner of her lips. "Officer," she said quietly as they reached the metal detector, "I hope you remember this moment." He chuckled, shoving her through the door. "Oh, I will." She looked over her shoulder, meeting his arrogant grin. "Good," she whispered. "So will I." Inside the courtroom, the air felt heavier than ever. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly, the scent of old wood and ink filling the room. Officer Blake marched in proudly, dragging Amara behind him like some criminal trophy. Her wrists were still cuffed, the skin beneath them already bruising. He pushed her into a chair beside the defense table, then straightened his uniform, smoothing his collar like a man about to receive a medal. The bailiff gave him a respectful nod. Blake smiled back, convinced he was the hero of his own story. "Your Honor," he began, his voice confident and rehearsed, "I apprehended this woman attempting to breach courthouse security. She refused to comply with standard procedures, became aggressive, and attempted to resist arrest." Across the room, Amara sat silently, her gaze fixed on him. Not a single word escaped her lips, only that same calm, unshakable stare. The presiding judge, a tired-looking man named Judge Reynolds, leaned back in his chair. "And what made you believe she was a threat, officer?" Blake folded his arms, ready for his performance. "She was acting suspicious, dressed out of place, carrying documents she clearly had no right to possess. When I questioned her, she got loud, started making up stories, claiming she worked here." He smirked, throwing a quick glance toward Amara. "They all say that." A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. The prosecutor, Miss Warren, a middle-aged woman with glasses perched on her nose, nodded sympathetically. "Officer Blake, you did the right thing. Too many people try to manipulate the system these days." Blake's chest puffed with pride. "Exactly, ma'am. We can't let anyone think they're above the law." From the back of the room, a few courthouse staff exchanged nervous looks. They recognized the woman sitting in handcuffs. But they stayed quiet, not out of ignorance, but fear. Judge Reynolds scribbled a note. "I assume you have evidence to support your account?" "Of course," Blake said smoothly, pulling out his phone. "Unfortunately, my body camera malfunctioned this morning, but I did manage to capture partial footage." He tapped the screen, showing a short clip that began halfway through their confrontation, just enough to make Amara look defensive, just enough to make him look justified. The prosecutor nodded approvingly. "That'll be sufficient for now." Amara leaned back slightly in her chair, her expression unreadable. Then, for the first time, she spoke. Her voice was calm, controlled, but every syllable carried quiet authority. "Your Honor," she said softly, "I have no objection to Officer Blake's video, but before we move forward, I'd like to make one small request." Judge Reynolds glanced up, mildly surprised. "And what might that be?" She smiled faintly. "That the court secure all courthouse surveillance footage from 8:45 to 9:15 this morning. Every camera, every angle." The room fell silent. Blake's smile faltered. "Why?" the prosecutor asked cautiously. Amara's eyes never left the judge. "Because truth doesn't malfunction." The judge blinked, unsure how to respond. Blake shifted uneasily beside the prosecutor's table. And as the bailiff quietly left the room to follow her request, Amara sat perfectly still, calm, bruised, but utterly in control. She knew exactly what was coming. Judge Reynolds adjusted his glasses, still processing her calm request. It wasn't how defendants usually behaved, not the ones he was used to seeing anyway. Most were frantic, crying, angry. But this woman, she sat there like she had all the time in the world, like the courtroom already belonged to her. "Your Honor," he began, clearing his throat, "you're representing yourself, I assume." Amara nodded gently. "For now, Your Honor, I think I'm more than capable of speaking on my own behalf." There was something in her tone, precise, deliberate, that made everyone lean in. Even the stenographer's fingers hesitated on the keys. "Fine," Reynolds said. "Proceed."
Amara stood slowly. The clink of her handcuffs echoed through the courtroom, a cruel reminder of the humiliation she was enduring. But she didn't flinch. She simply straightened her back, brushed a strand of hair from her face, and began to speak. First, I'd like to clarify the narrative presented by Officer Blake. He claims I was trespassing. However, I was walking on a public sidewalk leading directly to this courthouse entrance, a public space protected under the First Amendment. Blake frowned. The prosecutor blinked. Amara's voice grew steadier with every word.
He asserts that I was carrying stolen legal documents. That statement is categorically false. The briefcase he confiscated contains active case files and court memoranda, which, contrary to his claim, are my own. You expect us to believe that? Blake interrupted, his tone sharp, defensive. She turned to him, her eyes calm but cutting. I don't expect you to believe it, officer. I expect the evidence to prove it. Judge Reynolds leaned forward, intrigued despite himself. And how would you propose we verify that, Ms. Lewis? Amara took a step toward the evidence table. Those documents bear my signature and judicial seal. The courtroom fell silent again. Someone in the back shifted in their seat, whispering, "Judicial seal?" The prosecutor stood quickly. "Objection, Your Honor. The defendant is attempting to mislead the court." Amara turned toward her, her expression unreadable. "Mislead the court? That's the last thing I'd ever do, Miss Warren. I've spent the last 20 years defending it." The prosecutor froze, thrown off by the weight in Amara's words. Judge Reynolds cleared his throat again, uneasily. "Ms. Lewis, perhaps you'd like to clarify your background." A small, knowing smile curved on Amara's lips. "In due time, Your Honor." She returned to her seat, her tone still calm but layered with quiet power. "But for now, I'd like to remind this court that the preservation of truth is not optional. I trust the surveillance footage will confirm everything I've said." For the first time, Officer Blake's confidence cracked. He could feel sweat forming at his temples. Something wasn't right. Something big. Amara looked directly at him, her gaze steady, almost merciful. "Don't worry, officer. You'll understand soon enough." And when she smiled, it wasn't the smile of a defeated woman. It was the smile of someone who already knew how the story would end. The courtroom buzzed with uneasy whispers. Everyone could feel it. Something about this woman didn't add up, and yet everything she said carried the undeniable ring of authority. Officer Blake shifted uncomfortably in his seat, tapping his pen against the table to disguise his nerves. The confidence he'd paraded minutes ago was beginning to crumble. Judge Reynolds glanced between Amara and the prosecutor. "We'll take a 15-minute recess," he finally declared, his voice slightly hoarse. "I want that surveillance footage pulled immediately. Bailiff, see to it." The gavel hit the block with a dull thud. The tension didn't fade. It thickened. As the crowd began to disperse, murmuring under their breath, Amara sat still, her hands resting calmly on the table, the cuffs still biting into her wrists. The bailiff, a large man named Henderson, approached cautiously. He had worked in that courthouse for years, seen hundreds of faces pass through, but something about her, something was nagging at him. Her posture, her tone, her precision, it all felt familiar. "Ma'am," he said quietly, leaning closer, "can I get you some water?" Amara smiled faintly. "No, thank you, but there is something you can do for me." He hesitated. "Anything?" Her eyes lifted to meet his, calm but firm. "I need you to go to my chambers." He froze. "Your chambers?" "Yes," she said softly. "Second floor, 214. Bring me my black judicial robe, the one with the gold trim. You'll find my name on the plaque beside the door. And Henderson?" He swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am? Bring my gavel, too. The engraved one." The color drained from his face. He stared at her, realization dawning like lightning in slow motion. His voice dropped to a whisper. "You're—" Amara nodded once, a faint glimmer of sadness in her eyes. "Judge Amara Lewis. And I think it's time everyone else remembered that, too." Henderson's mouth opened, but no words came out. He simply nodded, trembling slightly, and hurried toward the door, his footsteps echoing down the marble hallway. Left alone, Amara leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. The sting on her cheek throbbed, but she ignored it. She had spent her entire career defending the justice system, and now she was about to remind it who she truly was. Her phone, returned to her temporarily, buzzed with messages from her clerk. "Judge Lewis, where are you? Your docket starts in 10 minutes. Another message followed. "Rumors spreading something happened outside the courthouse." She typed a brief reply. "Clear my schedule. I'm already in session." 15 minutes later, the sound of Henderson's voice boomed through the courtroom doors. "All rise," he declared, his tone trembling but proud. "The Honorable Judge Amara Lewis is now presiding." Gasps filled the room. Papers fell. The prosecutor's pen slipped from her hand. Officer Blake, standing frozen beside the table, turned slowly and saw her. Walking through the judge's chamber door, wearing her black robe trimmed with gold, holding the same gavel she had used for over 20 years.
The woman he'd handcuffed, humiliated, and called a liar was the judge of that very courtroom. And this time it was her turn to speak. The room erupted in chaos. Gasps, whispers, the shuffle of papers. It was like the air itself had been struck by lightning. Every single person in that courtroom felt it. The sudden shift in power, the weight of realization crashing down all at once. Officer Blake's mouth hung open. His face turned pale, then red, then a sickly shade of gray. "You can't be serious," he stammered, barely above a whisper. She's the—" "Yes," the prosecutor murmured, eyes wide. "She's the judge." Amara walked toward the bench with slow, steady steps. Every movement was deliberate, every sound echoing like a heartbeat in the stunned silence. The golden trim on her robe caught the light as she ascended the platform. She placed her gavel down gently. Her gavel, her courtroom, her law. When she sat, she did so with the calm assurance of someone who had carried justice on her shoulders for years. Her cheek was still bruised, her wrists still sore, but her eyes were clear and unyielding. "Officer Blake," she said softly, her voice now carrying the full authority of the bench, "you may remain standing." Blake froze, his knees nearly buckling. "Your Honor," Judge Reynolds began awkwardly, still half standing near his seat. Amara turned toward him, her tone polite but firm. "Thank you for stepping in during my unexpected delay, Judge Reynolds. You may return to your docket. I'll be handling this matter from here." Reynolds didn't argue. He just nodded quickly, his face flushed with embarrassment, and slipped out of the courtroom as fast as his robes would allow. Amara turned back to the man who had assaulted her. "Officer Blake, approximately 1 hour ago, you stood in this courtroom and testified under oath, correct?" His lips trembled. Yes, ma'am, Your Honor." She folded her hands neatly on the bench. "And during that testimony, you stated that I was, and I quote, acting suspicious, resisting arrest, and attempting to impersonate an official of the court. Did I hear that correctly?" He nodded weakly. "Yes, Your Honor." Her gaze didn't waver. "You also described me as another one of those people who think they're above the law." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Blake's hands shook. Amara continued, her voice as sharp as glass. "Officer Blake, I've presided over more than 15,000 cases in this courtroom. I've heard every excuse, every lie, every attempt to twist the truth.
But I must admit, your performance today was particularly creative." The courtroom was dead silent. Even the prosecutor sat frozen, eyes fixed on the woman she had just tried to convict. "Fortunately," she went on, "justice has a remarkable way of revealing itself." She reached under the bench and pressed a small button. The large monitor on the wall flickered to life. "This," she said, "is the full security footage from the courthouse entrance, recorded between 8:45 and 9:15 this morning, unedited." The first frame appeared, Amara standing calmly on the courthouse steps. Then Blake, marching up, finger pointed, anger flaring. The slap echoed through the courtroom speakers. The laughter, the insults, the shove against the wall. Gasps filled the room again. The prosecutor covered her mouth. One juror stood up, shaking his head. "Filthy liar, you people think you can go anywhere you want," Blake's own voice hissed from the speakers. Amara paused the video, letting the silence hang heavy. "Do you see any aggression from me here, officer? Any resistance? Any crime?" Blake couldn't answer. His throat had gone dry. "Interesting," she said, leaning back in her chair, "because the only crime I see here is yours." The courtroom erupted in a flurry of whispers. Cameras clicked, reporters scribbled furiously, and for the first time that morning, Officer Blake realized that the badge on his chest wasn't going to save him. The silence that followed was suffocating. Officer Blake stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, his confidence shattered like glass underfoot. The whole courtroom could hear his breathing, fast, shallow, panicked. Amara pressed play again. The video continued, showing every second of his cruelty. The shove, the taunts, the moment her briefcase hit the ground and the paper scattered like falling leaves. Then, the words no one could ever unhear. "Filthy animals like you belong in cages." A collective gasp filled the room. Someone in the gallery whispered, "Oh my God." Another person muttered, "He said that to her?" Amara paused the video again, letting the phrase echo into the silence. "Officer Blake, I want you to look at yourself. Listen to the words you chose. That's not law enforcement. That's hatred." His face was ghostly pale. "Your Honor, don't," she interrupted sharply. "Not yet."
Who sat stiffly, her notes trembling in her hands. "Ms. Warren, you vouched for his professionalism earlier, did you not?" The woman hesitated. I did, Your Honor. I was misled." Amara nodded once. "Misled indeed." She tapped the tablet again. "But that's not all." The screen changed to another video file. "This," she continued, "is the automatic backup from Officer Blake's own body camera." A murmur spread through the courtroom. Blake's knees nearly buckled. "That's impossible. My body cam malfunctioned." "Apparently not," Amara said calmly. "The county's security system uploads every file to cloud storage every 60 seconds. You may have forgotten that detail." The footage played. The courtroom watched as Blake's own voice snarled through the speakers. "Look at this one, thinking she owns the place. These people need to learn their place." Gasps rippled again. The video showed him grabbing Amara's arm, shoving her, mocking her as other officers laughed in the background. Every second of it undeniable. "Officer Blake," she said evenly, "do you see any aggression from me here?" He shook his head, barely able to speak. "No, Your Honor." "Any threats?" "No, Your Honor." "Then what exactly justified your use of force?" Blake's lips parted, but no sound came out. He looked lost, like a man watching his entire life dissolve in front of him. Amara wasn't done. "Let's also bring up the audio file recovered from Officer Thompson's body cam," she said. The next recording filled the courtroom. "Man, Blake's going off on this one. Think she's actually someone important like she keeps saying?" Nah, another voice replied. Look at her. Probably another welfare case pretending to be a lawyer. The sound of laughter. Then silence. Amara stopped the playback. Her eyes swept the room, sharp and steady. Those words, she said softly, were spoken while I was being assaulted by men who wear the same badge you do, Officer Blake. The weight of her words hung heavy, pressing down on everyone in that room. Now, she continued, standing, her robe flowing behind her like a shadow of justice itself. You claimed I was carrying stolen documents. Let's test that claim. She picked up her briefcase from the evidence table, unlatched it, and laid out the papers one by one. Every single document bore her name, Judge Amara Lewis, embossed, signed, sealed. The prosecutor exhaled shakily. The audience erupted in whispers again, and flashes from journalists' cameras illuminated the room like lightning. Amara turned back to the trembling officer. You wanted to teach me a lesson about authority, didn't you? She said quietly. Well, consider this your first lesson in what real authority looks like. Blake's voice cracked. Your Honor, please, Amara slammed the gavel once, the sound echoing like thunder. Silence! You've said enough. Every eye in the room was on her. Every lie had been burned away. And for the first time, justice didn't just speak, it roared. The echo of the gavel faded, but its impact lingered in the air like a storm refusing to pass. Every person in the courtroom sat motionless, hanging on Judge Amara's every word. Officer Blake stood trembling, his face drained of color. Gone was the arrogance, the smirk, the swagger. In its place was fear, raw, unmistakable fear. Officer Blake, Amara began, her tone calm but cutting. You said earlier that I needed to learn my place. Do you remember those words? He nodded weakly, his eyes fixed on the floor. Good, she said, because I believe it's time you learned yours. She picked up a thick folder from the bench, one the bailiff had quietly placed beside her during the recess. This, she lifted it slightly, is a compilation of every complaint filed against you in the past 15 years of your so-called service. Blake's head snapped up. What? Amara opened the folder, flipping through its pages slowly, methodically. 47 formal complaints, excessive force, racial profiling, unlawful arrests, intimidation, and in every single case. She paused, her voice turning ice cold. Your department found the allegations unsubstantiated. Gasps rippled through the room. The prosecutor's face went pale. She looked directly at Blake. Tell me, officer, is every citizen who accused you lying? Every one of them? Blake stammered, Your Honor, I was just following procedure. Amara slammed her gavel again. Crack! Procedure does not include hatred, she snapped. Procedure does not include slapping a woman on the steps of her own courthouse because of the color of her skin. The room went still. No one dared breathe. She straightened, regaining her composure. Now, for months, I've been working alongside the Department of Justice and the FBI's Civil Rights Division to investigate systemic misconduct within this city's police force. Your name, Officer Blake, has appeared in their reports more than any other.
Blinked rapidly, sweat beading on his forehead. You were investigating me? I was investigating patterns, Amara corrected. You just happen to be the perfect example of everything wrong with those patterns. She turned to the courtroom audience. For years, this man has hidden behind his badge, protected by silence, protected by bureaucracy, protected by people too afraid to speak. But that protection ends today. Blake tried to speak, but no sound came out. He looked utterly broken.
Amara continued, her voice lower now, almost like a verdict already being written in the air. Every word you said today was perjury. Every action you took was a violation of civil rights. You assaulted not just a woman, not just a judge, but the very system you swore to serve. She paused, then leaned forward slightly. Tell me, Officer Blake, do you understand the gravity of what you've done? He swallowed hard. I didn't know who you were. Amara's eyes darkened. That's exactly the problem. You didn't care who I was. To you, I was just another face you could dominate, another person you could humiliate without consequence. The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of her steady breathing. Then she picked up a paper from the folder and held it up. This, she said, is a copy of the complaint filed by a 17-year-old named Marcus Fields, a boy you arrested outside a convenience store 2 years ago. You broke his jaw. The charges were dropped for lack of evidence. She set it down and lifted another. And this one, Maria Delgado, 63 years old, assaulted during a traffic stop. Same conclusion. Amara's voice grew firmer. You called me a liar today, Officer Blake? But it's your own record that tells the truth. She stepped down from the bench, her robe flowing behind her as she approached him, slow, deliberate, every step echoing with righteous fury. You said I needed to learn my place, she whispered. Here's the truth. My place is right here, ensuring that people like you never again mistake power for justice. Blake's shoulders slumped. His badge, once a symbol of control, now looked like a curse pinned to his chest. Amara turned back toward the gallery, her gavel still in hand. Today isn't just about one officer. It's about a system that let him exist this long without accountability. But that ends now. She raised the gavel high. The law may have been silent before, but today it finally has a voice. And when she brought the gavel down, the sound wasn't just justice, it was history being rewritten. The courtroom trembled with the echo of the gavel, as if the very walls were exhaling after years of holding their breath. No one dared move. Even the air felt charged, like lightning was about to strike twice. Judge Amara stood tall behind the bench, her eyes locked on the man who once looked down on her as if she were less than human. "Officer Blake," she said, her tone deliberate and unwavering. "Before this court delivers its verdict, I want to remind you of something you said this morning." Blake's lips parted, but no words came. "You told me," she continued, "that people like me need to learn their place. You said that the law exists to teach lessons, and you were right about one thing. Actions do have consequences." She took a deep breath, her hands resting on the edge of the bench. "For 15 years, you have worn that badge like a shield. You have used it not to protect the innocent, but to intimidate them. You have hidden behind policies, behind silence, behind fear. But the truth, Officer Blake, doesn't stay buried forever." She nodded to Henderson, the bailiff. He stepped forward, holding a large envelope, the results of the expedited investigation she had ordered during the recess. Amara opened it, scanned the contents, then looked up again. "According to these records," she said, "you have been the subject of 47 complaints, including racial discrimination, excessive force, and falsified reports. 47. And in nearly every case, the victims were people of color." Murmurs swept through the room. A woman in the gallery covered her mouth. Our journalist scribbled furiously, knowing he was witnessing something historic. Blake lowered his head, tears beginning to pool in his eyes. "Your Honor, please," he whispered. "I never meant to—" "Enough!" Amara cut in sharply.
You meant every word you said when you called me a filthy liar. You meant it when you put your hands on me. You meant it when you laughed as I was dragged into this courtroom. The only thing you didn't mean was to get caught." The prosecutor looked down, unable to meet her eyes. She had stood beside Blake only hours ago, believing his lies. Now she wished she could disappear into the floor. Amara stepped down from the bench, her robe flowing around her like a dark wave of authority. "For years," she paced slowly, "people like you have destroyed lives, believing no one was counted."
Would ever hold you accountable. But today is different. Today, you are not the accuser. You are the accused. Blake sobbed quietly. The man who had strutted into that courthouse full of power now looked small, broken, hollow. "Officer Blake," she said, stopping directly in front of him, "this court finds you guilty of assault in the first degree, perjury under oath, and deprivation of civil rights under color of law." The words fell like stones in a silent pond. She turned to the gallery. For too long, the law has protected those who abuse their power. For too long, victims have been silenced while officers walk free. But today, let it be known, justice is not blind to corruption. Her gavel came down once. Crack. You are hereby sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. A stunned hush filled the courtroom. Then a wave of emotion swept through it. Some wept, others clapped softly, unable to contain their relief. Amara raised her hand for silence. "This isn't celebration," she said, her voice trembling with conviction. "This is accountability, and it's only the beginning." Blake looked up through his tears. "I'm sorry. I really am." Amara met his gaze one final time. There was no hatred there, only truth. "Apologies don't erase pain, officer, but maybe, just maybe, facing the truth will teach you what justice really means." She turned to the bailiff. "Take him into custody." As Blake was led away in handcuffs, the same ones he had used to humiliate her, the courtroom erupted into applause that lasted for minutes. For the first time in years, justice didn't feel like an idea. It felt real. Months passed, but the echo of that verdict still lingered in every corner of the courthouse. The day Judge Amara Lewis sentenced Officer Blake became more than just a headline. It became a symbol, a turning point, a wound that finally began to heal. The story spread across the nation. News anchors replayed the footage of her standing tall behind the bench, gavel in hand, the bruise still visible on her cheek as she declared, "Justice is not blind to corruption." The video went viral, reaching millions. For the first time in years, people began to believe again, not in the system as it was, but in what it could become. Blake's conviction triggered an earthquake within the police department. An internal investigation uncovered a web of misconduct stretching far beyond one man. 12 officers were terminated, 4 high-ranking officials were indicted, and over 400 cases linked to Blake's arrests were reopened. Dozens of wrongfully convicted citizens walked free, their names finally cleared. The community changed too. Protesters no longer stood outside the courthouse in anger, but in solidarity. They carried signs with Amara's name, calling her the judge who saw everything. She didn't bask in it. She simply went back to work, knowing the fight wasn't over. Her courtroom became a place of transparency. Every hearing was recorded, every officer's body cam footage verified before trial. New laws were passed requiring independent oversight for all police-involved incidents. The city, once known for injustice, became a model for reform across the nation. And yet through it all, Amara remained humble. Some mornings, she'd walk those same courthouse steps where all began. The stone still bore faint marks where her papers had fallen that day. Sometimes she'd stop, take a slow breath, and whisper to herself, "Justice remembers." Her chambers, once just another office, now held a bronze plaque on the wall, a gift from the community. It read, "Here, justice found its voice." One afternoon, a young law student knocked on her door, a girl who had been in the gallery that day, watching in silence as history unfolded. "Judge Lewis?" she said nervously. I just wanted to thank you. You made me want to become a lawyer." Amara smiled, her eyes softening. "Then promise me one thing. Don't just fight for justice when it's easy. Fight for it when it's hardest, when the world tells you it's pointless." The girl nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I will." When the student left, Amara stood by the window, watching the sunlight spill over the city. Her reflection glimmered faintly against the glass. Strong, steady, unbroken. She thought about that morning, the slap, the humiliation, the silence. And she realized something profound. Sometimes justice doesn't come gently. Sometimes it has to be forced into the light by those who refuse to bow. As the courthouse clock struck noon, she lifted her gavel, the same one engraved years ago with the words, "Justice is blind, but she sees all." She smiled faintly and whispered, "Yes, she does." And with that, she brought the gavel down on her desk, not in anger, but in peace. Because for the first time in a long time, Judge Amara Lewis knew justice had truly come full circle.